In 1916, Agatha Christie was far from being a well-known name in the literary world. In fact, she wasn't even taken seriously within her own family. Her sister, Madge, was already an experienced writer who had penned and published several short stories. Meanwhile, Agatha was just an avid reader with a budding interest in writing. When she expressed her desire to write a detective novel, Madge reacted with skepticism, even a hint of mockery. She went so far as to bet that Agatha wouldn't be able to craft a gripping mystery, especially not one that Madge herself couldn't solve. That very challenge became the turning point in Agatha Christie's career. She began working on her first novel, not only to prove her ability to her sister, but also to explore her own true potential as a mystery writer. From that initial doubt, Agatha gradually developed a unique writing style, one built around subtle clues, tightly constructed plots, and the art of misdirection. That debut novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, didn't just surprise Madge. It marked the beginning of the legendary career of the woman who would later be crowned the Queen of Crime. The first novel Agatha Christie wrote as a result of her bet with her sister, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, was more than a success. It launched what would become a collection of nearly 100 detective stories. Each one was a carefully assembled puzzle box packed with clues, red herrings, and layers of human drama. One of the key elements that made Christie's work so compelling was the setting she chose for her crimes to unfold. Christie often set her stories in isolated locations, such as a remote island, a deserted mansion, or a train car stranded in the middle of a snowy wilderness. Choosing settings cut off from the outside world allowed her to narrow down the list of suspects and heighten the psychological tension among the characters. When no one can leave, the characters are forced to face each other and to confront the fact that a killer is among them. She further amplified this sense of unease by often making her characters strangers to one another. This created an atmosphere of suspicion where anyone could be the culprit and no one truly knew who they could trust. Trapping people in a confined space, under stress, with no escape, this was one of Christie's most effective tools for accelerating both the plot and the emotional intensity. It's also one of the reasons readers are drawn into her stories from the very first pages. Although Christie's crimes often take place in strange, tense, and isolated settings, her characters are quite the opposite. They are usually built in a simple, almost two-dimensional way. This has drawn criticism from literary circles, who claim her characters lack psychological depth or emotional development. However, this simplicity was not a flaw. It was a deliberate strategy. Christie designed her characters to be instantly recognizable through a few prominent traits, whether it was their profession, personality, habits, or a distinct quirk. This helped readers focus on the mystery and the clues, rather than being distracted by complex inner lives. Yet this simplicity became a perfect tool for misdirection. By making readers believe they fully understood a character, Christie could flip the narrative and deliver unexpected twists. When someone acts in a way that defies expectations, the surprise hits even harder. That said, it's important to note that some of Christie's character types were based on period stereotypes, including biases about profession, gender, and ethnicity. This aspect of her legacy is more problematic, and fortunately, many modern mystery writers have found ways to use her techniques with more nuance and sensitivity. Although the characters in Agatha Christie's stories are often considered simple, she devoted great care to making them real and vivid in their own way. Christie did not create characters entirely from imagination. Instead, she was a keen observer of everyday life. Whether riding a train, sitting in a cafe, or attending social gatherings, she would quietly take notes on conversations, behavior, and the way people interacted with each other. She always carried a notebook and jotted down every detail she happened to overhear. Ordinary phrases, a distinctive way of speaking, or even a fleeting glance could become material for character development. Later, she would reorganize these fragments, weaving them into the narrative to build a cast of diverse and believable characters. Interestingly, when writing a story, Christie often did not decide in advance who the murderer would be. She allowed the plot to unfold naturally, changing the roles of characters as she went: who was a suspect, who was the victim, and who turned out to be the killer. This flexibility kept her stories full of surprises and made them difficult to predict, even for the most astute readers. This writing as discovery method kept her plots fresh and engaging, giving readers the sense that they were solving the mystery alongside the author, uncovering each clue and twist step by step. In the mystery genre, there is a very thin line between clever writing and confusing writing. If a story is too easy to guess, readers will be bored, but if it's too complex, they'll quickly lose interest. Agatha Christie understood this balance perfectly and mastered the art of combining unpredictability with accessibility. One of the secrets to Christie's success was her simple language. She avoided long, flowery sentences and instead wrote in a concise, direct, and crystal clear style. Her dialogue was natural and carried the rhythm of everyday speech. As a result, readers could easily follow the plot, even when being presented with a flurry of details, clues, and suspicions. What's remarkable is that, even with such simplicity, Christie managed to hide important clues in plain sight. Readers often felt they had seen everything, yet missed the most crucial details, simply because they were presented so naturally and subtly. This art of deception through simplicity is one of the most distinctive features of Christie's writing. She made readers feel like they had a real chance at solving the mystery, while at the same time guiding them exactly where she wanted, until the final pages when the curtain was pulled back and the truth was revealed. One of the most remarkable features of Agatha Christie's detective style is how she used clues. But they weren't merely hints to help solve the crime. Her clues were intricately designed to mislead the reader, making them feel as though they were on the right track, when in fact they had been misdirected from the start. A typical example is when a character remarks, "Everything tastes strange today." This small, seemingly throwaway detail turns out to be crucial. Most readers immediately focus on the last thing the character consumed, assuming that drink must have been poisoned. But if everything tastes odd, the poison had already been in their system long before the final sip. This kind of clue gives readers the illusion of deduction, while Christie has already set the trap in plain sight. In addition to hiding real clues within everyday details, Christie also planted false leads, deliberately crafted to make the reader suspect the wrong person. At times, a very specific detail points directly to a single suspect, only to later be revealed as a frame job set up by someone else. Sometimes, even the entire structure of the story itself becomes part of the deception. In one of her most shocking twists, the murderer turns out to be the narrator, a twist that collapses all the reader's assumptions in a single moment. Christie didn't just write mysteries. She created intellectual games in which the reader was both a player and a victim of her craft. Beyond clues and clever misdirection, a crucial ingredient in Agatha Christie's formula for success was her detectives. Among the many characters she created, two stand out as the most beloved and iconic: Hercule Poirot and Miss Jane Marple. Neither fit the traditional hero mold of detective fiction. They weren't physically imposing, didn't chase down criminals or carry weapons, and that made them unforgettable. Hercule Poirot, a small, well-mannered Belgian, was famous for his perfectly groomed mustache and razor-sharp analytical mind. Miss Marple, a seemingly harmless elderly lady from a quiet village, had an extraordinary talent for reading people and spotting patterns in human behavior. Both were outsiders, not official detectives or members of the police force, and it was precisely this outsider status that gave them a unique perspective, free from conventional assumptions or procedural blind spots. What they shared was an uncanny ability to make suspects lower their guard. Because they didn't appear threatening, they were able to observe, engage, and gather clues unnoticed. Bit by bit, they pieced together the fragments of the truth in ways no one expected. Christie breathed life into these characters and turned them into lasting symbols of the detective genre, a key part of her literary legacy. In the end, beyond all the clever storytelling tactics, Agatha Christie didn't just win a bet with her skeptical sister, she conquered the entire world of literature. Through her unique combination of unconventional detectives, cleverly hidden clues, and a deceptively simple cast of suspects, she created a near-perfect formula for the mystery novel. Her success didn't come from excessive complexity or supernatural elements. On the contrary, it stemmed from logical thinking, sharp observation, and a masterful ability to guide the reader's thoughts. Christie understood exactly what her readers would think, whom they would suspect, and what they would expect. Then she would deliberately lead them astray, letting them fall into her traps in the most natural way. With over 2 billion books sold worldwide, Agatha Christie has become the most successful female crime novelist of all time and an irreplaceable icon in literary history. Her works are not just simple detective stories. They are intellectual games between author and reader, where every tiny detail might be the key to the mystery or a perfectly crafted red herring. Now that you know the secrets Christie used, the real question is, what will you do with them? Perhaps you will be the one to write the next great detective story. Agatha Christie didn't just win a bet with her sister. She conquered the world of detective literature. What began as a personal challenge became the foundation of a legendary career that lasted for decades. Through her distinctive writing style and clever storytelling tactics, Christie created an enduring legacy in the genre of crime fiction. The key elements of her successful formula included quirky but memorable detectives, cleverly placed clues, and a cast of seemingly simple suspects who often held shocking surprises. Christie skillfully blended these factors to create stories that were easy to follow, yet endlessly thought-provoking. She didn't just tell a story, she designed a mental game in which readers were both audience and players, caught in a match she had carefully orchestrated. While some have criticized her style as simple or repetitive, it's undeniable that Christie set the gold standard for detective fiction, one that thousands of authors still follow today. Her works prove that you don't need elaborate plots or flashy techniques to impress. What truly matters is understanding human psychology and knowing how to tell a story intelligently. Now that you've grasped Christie's formula, the question is no longer, who is the killer? But rather, how will you tell your own story? Agatha Christie was not just a mystery writer. She was the mastermind behind a timeless formula for the genre. Over a career spanning more than half a century, she wrote nearly 100 novels and countless short stories, all stamped with her signature style: eccentric detectives, clever clues, and simple yet effective characters. Christie didn't rely on action scenes or modern technology to keep readers hooked. She captivated them through games of deduction, where every detail might be part of the truth, or a psychological trap. A passing comment, a strange reaction, or an ordinary object, each could turn out to be a crucial piece of the puzzle. Readers would follow her lead, theorize, and second-guess themselves, until Christie revealed the truth in the most unexpected way. It was this blend of sharp intellect and refined storytelling that earned her the title of Queen of Crime, and made her an endless source of inspiration for generations of writers. She didn't just spin compelling tales, she cast the reader as the detective, challenging them to analyze, interpret, and uncover the truth for themselves. And now, having understood the formula Christie used to fool millions, the final question is this: can you use those secrets to craft a story that no one can put down?